You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. You really are a heel. You're as cuddly as a cactus. You're as charming as an eel, Mr. Grinch. Today's guest on the podcast is Chris Wright. Chris is a professional mountain guide who splits his time between guiding, climbing, skiing, and doing badass first ascents. You know when you tell people you're a climber and they think you fly across the world to put on crampons and slog up big snowy mountains? Well, this guy actually does that. We talked a lot about the first ascent of Link Sar, which is a 7,000 meter peak in Pakistan. Chris climbed Link Sar this past summer along with Graham Zimmerman, Mark Ritchie, and Steve Swenson. I kept saying Swanson in the interview, but it is Swenson. Sorry, Steve. I'd love to have you on the show, and I promise to pronounce your name correctly. We talked about some of the history around Pakistan and why there's so much more to this type of climbing than just climbing. We talked about how Chris trained for the climb and why it took the team 3 days to get off the mountain after they summited. We talked about favorite post-expedition foods and why Chris is excited to go sport climbing this winter, and a lot more. I had a ton of fun talking to Chris, and I think you guys will like it, even if you have no desire to go climb a 7,000 meter peak. There's still some great nuggets. Everything we talked about will be linked in the show notes at thenuggetclimbing.com, including Chris's website and a trip report for Link Sar. And that's it. Please enjoy this conversation with Chris Wright.
Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.
So a few weeks ago, I went to a presentation at one of our local climbing shops here. And it was a presentation that you and Graham Zimmerman, your climbing partner Graham Zimmerman, had put on. You guys gave a slideshow and talked about your recent trip where you did this really awesome first ascent in Pakistan. How did this Link Sar trip come together, and how did that whole thing come about?
Well, kind of before we got rolling, I was telling the story about how Graham and I started going climbing together, which was basically, so I think he moved to Bend, asked me if I knew anyone who was renting a room. I was renting a room, so he moved in with me, I think in 2014, and maybe it was 2015, I can't remember, but he had a trip planned to go to Pakistan with Steve Swenson and Scott Bennett, and they made the first ascent of a really cool rock tower called Changi Tower, and Scott and Graham made the second ascent of K6 West, I think, via new route, and both of those peaks, I think you could say they were on the sort of southeastern edge of the kind of greater Charakusa Glacier area, which is a place where it's been easy to get permits in the last handful of years, and there's a lot of people who have been in there. Not that many people go into the Nangma Valley where they were, but both of those were sort of adjacent to the closed border region where it has been really difficult to go for a while. But from the top of Changi Tower, they looked across and saw this really beautiful, big, kind of picturesque snow and ice and rock peak. And
I remember Graham described it in the presentation. He said it was like, if you're watching The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, it looks like the top of the mountain where the Grinch lives. Yeah. It really does. It's kind of this perfect triangular peak just sticking out.
Yeah, and people have been trying it for a good handful of years now. Like there's been a bunch of attempts on it, but they'd all gone in from the west, from the Charakusa, because that was where you could get a permit to go in. And it's a really handsome mountain from that side as well. But the line that kind of gets you high on the mountain terminates at the end of this summit ridge and leaves you pretty far from the summit with this really jagged line of towers in between. And even if you get to kind of the ultimate tower, it's like this kind of micro big wall at the like 6,800 meters that just looks like this really difficult to climb piece of stone. So folks had gotten like kind of close, but also were still really far away going in from that side. But anyway, so Graham was like, whoa, what's that thing? I want to climb that. That looks cool. And Steve, being Steve Swenson, who has been, I want to say he's been everywhere, but especially in the Karakoram.
And
He's
real
been
quick,
everywhere.
for just context for listeners, who's Steve Swenson?
So Steve Swenson is easily one of the most accomplished alpinists of his generation. And so Steve's 65. He's from Seattle, and he's a retired civil engineer. And somehow he's just managed to combine this incredible alpine climbing career with a really successful home life, with a really successful business life, and just sort of is this anomaly in the alpine climbing world, which is, really kind of littered with stories of, heartbreak and divorce and, guys who have only their climbing and live in a, whatever. They're just not these great stories of these whole lives necessarily. And Steve's always been the counterpoint to that, but somehow has remained on the cutting edge for a long time. And I think, getting to know Steve, part of that is because he is like this infinitely reasonable person, but he's also an incredible project manager. And on the first trip we did together, not even into the big mountains, I just saw like why Steve has gotten so much done. And that's a whole nother story, which basically involves us trying to drive into the Canadian Rockies to get to a climb, and him assigning me and the other guy we were with to shovel like basically a 50-meter section of snow-drifted road while he used my avalanche saw to like cut down branches and pad the edges, and he had like a rate at which we needed to shovel by and check in on to make sure that this was going properly. And I think this was motivated kind of by a guy in the parking lot telling us like, no, it's a bad idea, you shouldn't do that. And I could just see the Steve Swenson, I'll do what the fuck I want kicking in. And anyway, we like shoveled, got in, did the climb, and it's sort of a funny story, but at the same time I know that Juan and I, the other guy, we because we said as much to each other quietly as we shoveled, like neither of us really believed that this was a good idea or that we were actually going to get to climb the climb that day. But it was clear that Steve did. Steve had the vision. Steve had the metrics by which we would measure our success, and had clearly calculated, well, if we leave here and we go try to climb something else, the time spent, blah, 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 like this is our best option. Let's try it. If it fails, so it goes, and it succeeded. So anyways, but Steve's done a ton of first ascents all over the world. He's climbed a lot in the Karakoram. He made the first ascent of the world's, at the time, second highest unclimbed peak in 2011, which he won the PLA d'Or for. And he is just one of those guys that I grew up in alpine climbing kind of idolizing and being inspired by his like pictures from his expeditions when I was leaning against the counter at Mountain Supply, flipping through magazines and
local climbing shop here in Bend.
And so he and Graham had been on this trip. They had gotten to be friends, I think, through either the Seattle climbing community or the Alpine Club. I'm not sure. I can't remember the story there. But anyway, Steve had tried Link Sar in 2001, had not gotten permission to go back there since. And when they went in 2015 and Graham saw this beautiful mountain and said, I want to climb that, Steve said, yeah, I already tried to climb that once. I want to climb it too. And I've been wanting to climb it for the last 14 years. Maybe we should try to get a permit again.
Yeah.
So
cool. So they're climbing something way across the valley and they're just looking over at this amazing thing like, hey, and Graham's thinking, hey, what's that? I want to go climb that. Yeah.
I mean, I don't even think it's not that way across the valley. It's just like pretty much like right there.
Okay.
And so they got an up close view of it, which actually turned out to be incredibly useful because the perspective that they got from Changi Tower is what in a lot of ways exposed the line of weakness that we would eventually follow.
Okay.
But everybody knew about Link Sar. I mean, it was one of those kind of, I don't know if I can say open secret because it definitely wasn't a secret, but it was like the phrase that always seems to get tossed around in alpine climbing is like the last great problem of the Himalaya, last great problem of the whatever. And that was definitely one of those last great problem type routes.
Okay. And zooming out a little bit, because we talked on this a little bit, but just to make it really clear for listeners. So this is northeast Pakistan, and you mentioned it being really close to the border. which would put it kind of in questionable territory. So can you kind of describe a little bit of the geology around it and where you guys were?
Yeah, so basically when India was a British holding, basically what we think of as the entire South Asian subcontinent was India, including, Bangladesh, including India, including Pakistan. And when partition happened, the British had this really unenviable task of figuring out, well, how do we divide up the continent? And so the way that they did it was basically by assigning majority Hindu states to India and majority Muslim states to the new country that was going to be Pakistan. And once they got up into the mountains, they had the problem of what to do with Kashmir, which was a princely state run by a guy who was himself Hindu over a Muslim majority. And when Lord Mountbatten, who was the viceroy of India, was charged with doing this, he basically said, I don't want this job. It's impossible. There's no way this is going to go well. And the Queen and the Prime Minister said, yeah, I know it's an impossible job, but we're going to ask you to do it, and we're basically not going to let you say no. And so one of the deals that he kind of made was, okay, well, I'm going to do the best job I can, but there's going to be a few exceptions. And this was like a deal that was made with the Indian Parliament and all the parties, was basically, I'm going to get all of these states assigned to Pakistan or India, but you got to give me 4 that I might not get to go because they're all independent kingdoms and independent states under a government, and they're not going to want to give up their power. Kashmir was one of those. So that's that's the long way of coming around to the fact that Kashmir was a problem, but there weren't that many people that lived there.
Okay.
And so the way it ended up was that they basically said, we're just going to draw the line here, and we're going to have a referendum later to let the Kashmiri people decide whether they want to be part of India or part of Pakistan, because we basically can't get their ruler to play ball right now. And all of Kashmir was Indian controlled at the time, and the Pakistanis took the northern part of it, which is Gilgit and the states of Gilgit and Baltistan, and occupied it. And the Indians were on the other side, occupying Kashmir proper up to basically this spine of mountains, which is the Saltoro Ridge, which is the line of mountains on the other side of the valley from Link Sar.
Okay.
And so then in 1984, the Siachen Conflict began, and the Siachen is the largest non-polar glacier in the world, and it's basically what drains the whole eastern side of the Karakoram. And so its right-hand side, if you were looking on the map, is India. Its left edge is K2, the Gasherbrum group, all those big mountains right there. And so the Indians would approach the line of control, basically the disputed border, from the east, and the Pakistanis would approach it from the west, and everything close to that border was basically just a closed conflict zone. And so they didn't want to issue climbing permits once that conflict started, and the area was closed.
Did you learn all of that just out of a desire to climb mountains? I'm sitting here is this guy a history major?
No, you learn this stuff reading because you hang out with Steve Swenson, and I swear that explanation I just gave is you got a lot of it wrong, kind of third grade explanation compared to what Swenson would give you, because he has this encyclopedic knowledge of history and of the geopolitical context of this place, and it just sort of makes you feel like you need to kind of get a clue. And so I've read a bunch of books about it.
Okay, cool.
But it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
It's fascinating history. But
so at the start of your presentation, you kind of opened things up by speaking about the criteria at which you kind of evaluate a new objective, a new expedition. Is this going to be worth 8 months of my life to go do this thing? So Graham sees this peak, and Steve's like, yeah, hey, I've already tried it. I'd love to do it again. How does that get pitched to you? And maybe what is it about Link Sar that excited you or kind of met those criteria?
So I knew of Link Sar. Like I said, everybody knew of it.
Okay.
There were teams that were trying to get permits to go there every year, and teams that were attempting it, for all the time that I've been kind of climbing this sort of thing. And so I'd seen pictures of it, and I knew it was, incredibly pretty. One of the last unclimbed 7,000 meter peaks, not only in the Karakoram, but really in the world. And when Graham went on expedition in 2015, I couldn't go. I was already doing my thing. He was doing that thing, but we kind of said like, oh, we should go do this sort of thing together. And like I said, we went climbing together in 2016, and we did a cool big new route in the St. Elias and kind of used that as like on some level, like the test for do we work well in the mountains, because we already knew we liked each other.
Where is that?
So that's in the Wrangell St. Elias area. It's kind of like, it's not quite southeast Alaska, but it's on the very kind of northern edge of what you might call southeast.
Okay.
And it's a range that's got quite a rich mountaineering history. It's where Mount Logan is.
Okay.
So the biggest peak in Canada, which is like I think it's 19,000 something. And there's a group called the University Range, which are mostly really pretty kind of 12 to 14,000 foot peaks. And there was a peak called Celino Peak that had a really gorgeous 6,000 foot face on it, which had been tried a few times before, but nobody had really paid a lot of attention to it because that area is not got the great rock and ice and snow climbing that the Alaska Range is famous for.
Okay.
But this peak looked like a real stunner. And when we asked Carlos Bueller, who is another kind of American climbing legend, about it, knowing he'd tried it before, he got really cagey, and it was obvious that he thought this was worthwhile. So, so we went and we gave it a shot. And I mean, the rock was utterly dismal. The seracs were big, and the snow was lousy. But it was a great climb. I'll definitely never go back to that range again. But anyway, it worked. It worked.
I love all that combination of words. That's pretty funny.
So anyway, so we said, hey, that was 2016. We said we should go on a big trip. And I think Scott Bennett, Graham's partner in 2015, was kind of moving away from this style of climbing. And I think, Steve and Graham were really excited about doing another big mountain trip. And since Graham and I had been kind of pointing towards that, it was natural that they asked me if I wanted to come. And it was a bit of an up and down, actually, in that we originally wanted to go to Link Sar, and Steve showed us his pictures from 2001 when he was there initially, and I saw the pictures that they took in 2015 and was really excited. But, of course, we didn't think we were going to get a permit for that, so we had actually kind of pointed a lot of our efforts towards something else in the western part of the range, and we thought that was a sure bet, but we probably wouldn't get Link Sar because the whole political situation is really fluid there. Basically, at the very end, we found out you can have the Link Sar permit. You can't have that other one.
Okay.
And so we got really excited and went to Link Sar.
How far out in advance are you having to figure that out? I mean, during the presentation at some point you mentioned it's like an 8-month planning period for something like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because you point your energies towards it, right? And it's the better part of a year training cycle to really feel strong for one of these things. And obviously, you've got to get the funding in place, which for us means a lot of grant funding, a lot of grant writing, a lot of just trying to get all of those ducks in a row. And then, of course, setting up your schedule so that you can be obsessed with this thing for the next year and then take off 3 months to actually go do it. But, the permit thing is a wild card because you can apply for the permit now for next year, but the offices that field that application are not very responsive, and it's by design that they're opaque, that you'll never know if you don't get the permit, which agency shut it down. Because if I understand the process properly, basically they're first going to give it to their National Intelligence Service, the ISI, who is going to sort of make sure you're not a spy or somebody and you're allowed to come to Pakistan. Then they'll kick it over to the military intelligence, who'll sort of look at exactly what it is you want to do and see are you going to see something you're not supposed to see, or do we not want you in that area for whatever reason? Then they approve it. I think it gets kicked over to the Army, who's like the boots on the ground that is who's going to have to deal with you. And I think it's just whatever brigadier is in charge of the area at any given time that will say like, yeah, great, we'd love to have climbers, or like, no, we don't really want to deal with that right now.
Gotcha.
And then I think that package gets thrown back to the intelligence service for final approval. And if any of those guys say no, then the answer's no, and you'll never know why. But equally so, they could say yes, and it could go across someone's desk, 2 weeks before you're supposed to leave, and they say, wait, what? No, which is exactly what happened in 2017.
Oh, okay.
We had the permit literally 2 days before we were going to fly. We heard the permit was pulled.
Oh.
So we had this debate of what should we do, and we ended up flying to Islamabad with no permit and spending like 4 days calling in every favor we could.
Oh, wow.
Until our permit was reinstated just as mysteriously as it was revoked. So,
oh, man.
It's funny. It sounds really dramatic to talk about this permitting thing, but it's just, it's like it's kind of a big ask of all the people involved to say, hey, can like we come and, be in your hair while you're trying to do whatever, like in a war zone. Is it cool if we just like set up some tents and like run around climbing? And if we get in trouble, can we use your helicopters to rescue us? Is that cool? And it's like,
right.
It's pretty understandable how they might say like, no.
Do you think they're tuned into like mountaineering and alpine climbing culture at all? Like, do they understand that it's a cool thing, or are they just like, what the hell are you guys doing out there?
I think it's an interesting question, because the answer is it just depends on who.
Okay.
Because in 2000, I think it was 2000, there was an expedition that went in there composed of Steph Davis, Jimmy Chin, I forget who else was on the expedition, but they got permission to go climb this beautiful rock tower because the brigadier general at the time was really into climbing. I mean, I wouldn't say they have a deep history of mountaineering there, but obviously, K2 is in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. All the Gasherbums, a bunch of the 4,000ers, 8,000 meter peaks are there. So they've dealt with climbers a bunch, and there have been some really, really exceptional Pakistani mountaineers, most notably Nazir Sabir, who is the guy who we work with a lot on these trips, but he put up a new route on K2 back in 84, 87, I can't remember, with the Japanese. He was the first Pakistani to climb Mount Everest. So I think if you get somebody who's like, oh, climbing is cool, great, let them go. And if you get the guy who's like, I don't care about climbing, like this sounds like a pain, he'll say, don't let them go.
Do you think, and also, I mean, that just brings to mind, do you think there's any politics involved as far as if someone is into climbing, are they going to want their Pakistani, hero to have a chance at this mountain that's got this kind of legacy around it? Or are they like pretty open to anybody doing it?
I think the politic is less around that and more about tourism. So when we were there in 2017, they were kind of leading up to a general election, and a guy named Imran Khan, who was a former cricket star, was running for office, and everybody said like, oh, there's no way he'll get elected. And it was at a time when they were pretty like disillusioned with their government, and he did get elected. People still have plenty to complain about with that, but he's been really pro-tourism. And so I think the politic of why these areas continue to open up is, I think that he's listened to the people in this region who used to have, really rich trade in tourism, because people would go there to go trekking and go for their, mountain climbing, mountain walking holiday, the same as you would in India or Nepal. And they've lost a lot in the last 20, 30 years since the Siachen Conflict started. So I think they've kind of been listened to on this one, and Islamabad is saying open it up to tourism again.
Got it. So. Okay. Regarding your training, so you're talking about spending a lot of time in specific preparation for something like this. Obviously, you're an incredibly well-rounded climber. You've got rock climbing skills, you've got ice climbing skills, mixed climbing skills. You're comfortable in snow. But it sounds like this climb was a lot of just wallowing in snow. you did a little bit of ice climbing, a little bit of mixed climbing and dry tooling and stuff, but is that true? Just a lot of wallowing in snow, and then what's the training look like for something like that? What are you doing to prepare?
Yeah, so I actually got really lucky a handful of years ago that I was giving a presentation here in Bend. I forget what the series was even for, but a guy named Scott Johnston also was giving a presentation as part of the series. And Scott wrote a book called Training for Alpine or Training for the New Alpinism with Steve House.
Oh, yeah.
So the connection is Steve is from Oregon and used to live here in Central Oregon. And for anybody who doesn't know Steve House, he's like probably the most famous alpinist of our generation. And Scott also used to live here. Scott's made his career training Nordic athletes and has, trained a bunch of Olympic level athletes. And he started training Steve because once they both left Central Oregon, they both ended up in Washington's Methow Valley. And through their kind of work together getting Steve ready for big expeditions, they sort of, I wouldn't say they invented, but they certainly refined and cataloged kind of a technique for training for this type of climbing.
Okay.
And so I met Scott at that program and asked him if he would work with me. And I've worked with him and their company Uphill Athlete since. And I feel super lucky because they've been insanely successful and they're super busy and they're training everybody from, a guy who wants to climb Rainier next summer as like his big goal and, people who are doing this at an elite level, whether it's mountain running or randonnée racing, ski mountaineering, mountain climbing, etc. They've got an incredible team. But anyway, so I basically just do what Scott tells me.
Okay.
And when we were talking about this in 2017, we sat down and I talked to him about what the route looked like. And he said, well, basically it sounds like unless you're really wrong, you climb hard enough technically for all of the mixed or ice or whatever you're going to encounter. So it doesn't feel like we need to, get you to be better at that. We need to get you to the point where you feel like you can do a lot of that in a row and at altitude and with a pack on, but mostly this sounds like a lot of hard work. And so those guys have put together exactly the training program for that, which is maintain your rock climbing, maintain your mixed climbing, but really if you can climb rock and you have the technique for mixed, it's the same. It's just holding on and pulling.
Okay.
And get really good at going up hills for a long time with heavy weights and like get your core strong, get your legs strong, get your heart strong, and like we're just gonna hammer that for basically 8 months before you go.
Wow.
So
yeah, got it. Sounds terrible to me.
It's a lot. It's kind of fun, and it's been great actually because with Scott and Steve having lived here in Central Oregon, Scott doesn't say like, oh, hey, find a hill like this to do this workout on. He tells me exactly where to go. And so it's, go to this hill, fill up your water containers in this, creek.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Put, 60 pounds on your pack. And I know it takes exactly, this amount of time to get to the top of this hill if you're nailing the workout.
Wow.
So it's been really fun.
That's super cool.
In as much as climbing water up hills is fun.
Do you enjoy it? Or are you just thinking about Link Sar the whole time?
No, I enjoy it. I mean, I think that, some people like training more than others. Mm-hmm. And I certainly wouldn't have the attention span for it if I didn't have the end goal in mind. But I'd also be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it in that masochistic kind of way. I mean, I know that, you're a training fanatic from what I hear.
It looks really different, but sure, in my own way.
But you know what it's like. It's like the days when... you don't really want to do it. You're still like proud of yourself on some level, and it feels good to know that you're like getting stronger and building something.
Yeah. Yeah. And the goal is kind of just the compass, right? Like it's guiding you into a direction and a lifestyle that you just really enjoy anyway. And it gets you to get out, and push yourself and live the kind of life that you want to live, regardless of what the outcome of the climb ends up being.
Yeah.
I imagine that's got to be really similar.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure the life I want to live definitely involves trying hard. Sometimes I wonder if the life I want to live involves, those workouts exactly. But I get to not do them for another few months.
So you guys end up going over there, and it's you and Graham. You guys are both in your 30s, and you've got Steve and Mark. We haven't talked about Mark yet. Two guys in their 60s. And that's really interesting to me. It's obviously a team that's a mix of, Graham kept saying you guys were providing the horsepower, and sounds like Steve's providing a lot of the management, problem-solving sort of skill set. What are the different roles that you guys are all playing on something like this, and why was that team such a good combination of skills?
Yeah. So it's really funny for me to answer this question in particular because it sounds like I'm just saying it because it's a good story, but it's really true that everybody brought a skill set that was complementary, and we ended up needing all of them in the end. Oh, cool. And it's like the kind of the symmetry of this whole story is something that I think will leave all four of us feeling like we were part of something really special out there. But in terms of the nuts and bolts of it, I would say that Steve and Graham are both really good organizers. They're really good project managers. Like, I'll get us there. And, I as a guide, I do a lot of logistics, as part of my job, but I'm not the guy who wants to live in Excel.
Yeah, some people really like it.
Yeah, and Steve and Graham are both that guy.
Okay.
They're both really good with that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'll make the phone call to bug somebody for something, but I don't really want to. Okay. Those guys enjoy it. That's their scene. So they contribute hugely in that. I mean, Steve in particular has the organizational knowledge of how you do these big expeditions. And frankly, what I've learned over a bunch of years of expedition climbing is the best expedition climbers, they're not better climbers than anybody else. They're better researchers. They're better logisticians. They're better at taking care of themselves. They're better strategists. And Steve is pretty much the best at all of those things.
Okay.
So that's what he brings to the table. Graham is really good at that sort of thing as well. And I mean, in addition to just being an incredibly positive person to be out there with, that's not to discount either of their climbing abilities. They're both great climbers. Mm-hmm. That just doesn't happen to be the hardest thing to find, I don't think, in an alpine climbing partner. Okay. And I think both have a good eye for the long game. I think that there's so many qualities that you're looking for in a partner for anything, but especially in alpine climbing. You want somebody who's kind of got the same vision that you do for what you want to do when you're out there, the kind of lines you're seeking, and somebody who pushes you to kind of give everything you've got and brings the best out of you. But you also want somebody who shares the same kind of risk assessment that you do and knows when to pull back. And I think that you see sometimes these partnerships where both people are the special people that they are because they give so much and are willing to completely, go all the way. But often, those relationships result in a bunch of great climbs until somebody doesn't come home. Mm-hmm. And, that's the sort of thing I think as a young climber you hear about. And then eventually if you stay in this particular game long enough, you start losing people, and it's it starts to feel a lot more real. So I think having partners that you feel bring the best out of you, but are also gonna pull you back, or gonna pull themselves back and keep the eye on coming home as much as possible. I mean, accepting that what we're doing is insanely dangerous and super high risk, and if you if you can't accept that, then you can't go do this kind of climbing in the mountains. But once you do accept that, there's still ways that you can approach it and still
those critical decision moments where you either push into the less safe terrain, or you decide to, hey, this isn't feeling right, we need to turn around right now. Yeah. That sort of thing.
Yeah, so both of those guys have the vision for that, and so does Mark. Okay. And I don't I didn't know Mark before this expedition, other than by reputation, and knew that he and Steve were really close. And, Mark's got an equally impressive resume and is an equally kind of just effective individual overall. He's been super duper successful in his business life, and is another guy who, kind of stands out as an example of a whole person in this world. That, he's got a successful business, he's got a beautiful family, and he's, still climbing 513 at 60. And it's like, yeah, that's the guy, those are the guys you want to hang out with.
Yeah,
so,
cool.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect lead-in. So I was listening to an interview with Steve Swenson and Graham as well on the Dirtbag Diaries podcast. And it was a really nice episode. I'll link to it in the show notes over at thenuggetclimbing.com. And Steve was talking about how one of his challenges in the last few years is that he has to keep finding these younger and younger partners. Like, all of his partners that he's been climbing with forever just keep aging out, and he just ends up climbing with younger and younger guys. But, he also said it's a really neat opportunity for him, because he can learn from the younger generation and they can learn from him. And I was just curious, is there anything that you learned from Steve or from Mark or both of those guys on this trip?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton. It's
yeah.
I've learned a lot about the organizational aspects, and I've been on a bunch of big trips before this, but watching them be themselves on expedition is, I think, really helpful. It's like if you went on the trip and you were with somebody who was just nervous all the time and was super stressed and was, 100% fixated on the objective and had a lousy time, it would be a lot different than being with these guys who are super comfortable, who are being present out there and taking the time that you get to spend with yourself and with your partners as a gift, and carrying that into the climbing, where it helps you remember the idea that getting to the top of this thing, sure, it's like the stated goal, but as cliched as it sounds, all of it's really just a context for being the person that you want to be, and giving yourself the opportunity to live this adventurous life that's, full of meaningful experiences that you share with people that you love. And those guys have been doing it together for the last 30 years, and it shows. And it's hard to really, I guess, quantify those lessons, but I think just soaking it up when you're around them is really useful. Of just, this is not only an example of how you do this, like this style of alpine climbing, but also just two guys living lives that are full and admirable, and that, mine wouldn't be as rich without theirs in it. That answers the question. I don't know.
Yeah. Steve seems to have a really healthy and really mature perspective around the expedition and the goal and just the experience. It seems like he's a guy that is really comfortable with finding enjoyment and appreciation in the process and not needing the outcome. I also listened to an interview with you after your guys' 2017 attempt. You mentioned that a couple times, that you guys were out there in 2017 and you tried Link Sar and you didn't do it. Mm-hmm. And it was a short interview with you, and I can link to that one as well. I can't remember the name of the podcast that it was on. But I really enjoyed and appreciated your philosophy around the failure, and how, the word failure maybe didn't do it justice. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I came home from that trip and people asked how was it, and it was, again, I felt like I was feeding people a line, saying, it was this incredible trip in every way except that we didn't get to the top. And I was grumpy then that we didn't get to the top, and I'm incredibly grateful now that we did. But, it's not bullshit that it was an amazing trip. I'd never been to Pakistan before. I'd never met all of these incredible people before. I'd never seen these mountains. I, shared a really rich set of experiences with the two men who I'm incredibly close with now, and that's not failure. We did depending on your perspective, we did fail to climb the mountain, and certainly we did. But, if you take a longer view on it, and I know that one of the things that Steve always says is, pulling back. He likes to talk about pulling back to the 50,000 foot view, and or 30,000 foot or something. I don't know. But now it's easy to see, since we did it, that it was just one step. It was part of the process of doing it. It's a lot harder to see when you're at the part of the process where you didn't get what you wanted. But I think that, having that kind of bigger perspective is something that has really been part of Steve's world, and is something that, we talk a lot about and try to stay really aware of. And in the end, again, as cliched as it sounds, it turns out to be true, because none of what we did this year would have meant as much to me if we didn't have that experience in 2017 as well. That said, we got completely routed by weather, and it certainly had its miserable parts. But
I don't think you stay in this game very long if you're not okay with not sending every once in a while, because it's a huge gamble. You have this limited time window. You might get shut down by weather. That going into it, and you're still committing 8 months or 12 months of your life to this thing. So I can't imagine that you stay in it very long if you have if that whole process isn't kind of a victory in itself, or worth it for itself, for its own sake.
Yeah, and I think that, like we were talking about, kind of just it being a context for living the life you want to be, and hopefully be the best version of yourself. And I don't think it matters whether you're climbing mountains or, frankly, doing anything else. You've got to put yourself out there, and, that involves being willing to fail. And, it's terrifying. I'm sure there's some venues in my life where I would do well to heed my own advice on that one, right? But it's it doesn't matter whether it's climbing, or certainly what part of climbing it is. You've got to be willing to fail, or you're never going to get anything done. So
you guys were up at about, it must have been, 22,000 feet or something. You're getting really close to the top. I think you had 3 or 4 pitches left. Graham's leading, and you're belaying. And Graham takes this 100-foot fall. What was your experience like being on belay and seeing Graham? He knocked a slab of snow loose, takes this fall.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know the story already, Graham gets knocked off his feet by an avalanche, goes for a big fall, and is totally okay. I feel like it's worth saying that first, if this is the first time anyone's hearing the story, although I just ruined the suspense. But yeah, one of the trickiest things about climbing this mountain this summer was the snow. And we went early this year. We gave ourselves a lot of time, and we found that it was one of the heaviest winters that they'd ever had in the Karakoram, or at least they had on record, and that everything was insanely snowy, and that presented all kinds of problems, from the meadow where we had camped in 2017 was not a grassy meadow. It was 5 feet of snow. So it made it tricky to establish an advanced base camp. We did a lot of digging.
Yeah, you guys did a ton of digging.
So much digging. Honestly, so much digging. And it was just hilarious because, on these trips that everybody back home is sending and doing all kinds of cool climbing, and I'm hearing from Lizzie, my girlfriend, oh, she just did this route and this route and that route. I'm like, that's cool. I have dug in the mud for the last week. I've built a number of stone platforms. I've hacked drainage channels out of wet grass. It's like manual labor, but you're trying to keep your eyes on the prize. Anyway, so it was really snowy, and part of the difficulties were knowing what you could and couldn't do in order to not get caught in some sort of heinous large avalanche. And we were really patient and waited until the mountain seemed like it was in good enough condition to be climbed without adding that danger factor. Obviously, there's no way you can create a map of the snowpack on the entire mountain. And that last day, I should say in the days leading up to that, we hadn't seen any signs of instability in the snow. And, as somebody who kind of is a snow professional and manages risk professionally, it's that's one of the things that I kind of bring to the team is a lot of experience in that stuff. And so I in particular was really keeping my hackles up for it. And that day I kind of led I started that day off and led us through some technical pitches and some easier travel on lower angle snow. And I did find evidence of a small slab, but it was really shallow, and it was the first time I'd seen it that day. And it seemed like no, we didn't encounter it again for the rest of the day. And I was like, we were on the lookout, but the snow was just deep and unconsolidated and lousy. And it was hard to find, it was hard to move. It was hard to find anchors. Like when I look back at the pictures now, the trenches are just kind of hilarious. But I was finishing my lead block and was sort of, in one of those moments of feeling a little like burnt and kind of strung out, and hadn't been able to, I don't think, place much gear on that route because, again, it's just sort of unconsolidated snow. And miraculously, as I kind of approached this little rib, found 2 really good screw placements and built an anchor that was like unassailably good and super duper, like really, really psyched to have that. And that was me turning over where I turned over the lead block to Graham. And so he goes out around the corner and he finds some not great ice and places a screw, and then he climbs up above and he's totally out of sight. And at one point I look up and see snow coming down at us and yell avalanche. And we're getting hit with this snow that's kind of washing down the face above us. And, it was pretty scary for a moment until you realize, no, like this isn't the story where like this is some massive avalanche that's going to like tear your anchor out and clear you off the face. It was like, this is over pretty quickly, and it wasn't that big. And my worry when it was over wasn't, am I okay? It was, I'm holding Graham on the ropes. Is he okay? And so we'd been climbing as a team of 4. So one person would lead trailing 2 ropes, and 2 people would climb on the end of those, and one of them would trail the 4th or the 3rd rope for the 4th person. So Mark and I were at the belay. Steve was just coming up to the belay. So he was on an independent rope, and we were able to belay him out so that he could talk to Graham. And it's like not a very funny memory, except for this part of we could hear Graham yelling, which was like this huge relief because, your initial thought is, am I holding an okay Graham or like a not okay Graham?
Yeah.
So when he was yelling, Mark and I were like, okay, great. And Steve's maybe like 20 feet off to our side at the rib where he can look over the other side. And we can hear him yelling, but Steve's like, I can't hear him. And we're like, what do you mean you can't hear him? I can hear him. What's he saying? And he's like, I don't know. And then I looked over and like it was kind of cold. Yeah. Steve had like, a warm hat and like 6 hoods up, including his helmet. And I was like, Steve, take your fucking hoods off. And he was like, oh yeah, okay. And took them off, and he's like, oh, he says he's okay.
Like,
oh my gosh. Okay, awesome, great. And Steve and I have like both laughed about that since. But then the question was, well, what's okay mean? Is he like okay, or is he like not merely dead okay?
Yeah.
And in this kind of like relayed yelling match, he's like, no, I really think I am okay. And so often when you have to when you can't free climb a pitch in this rope setup, you'll jug one of the skinny, half ropes and get belayed on the other. So in order for that to happen, Steve had to build an anchor, fix the line for Graham to jug and belay him on the other. And this whole time, Mark and I are kind of huddled together at the original belay having this conversation of like, what does this mean? Like the summit's right there. Obviously, we've got a bunch more climbing between here and there, but is this how the story ends? Like, are we done? Are we going down now?
And you're at, what, 22,000 feet?
I think we're higher, but no, yeah, you're right. Something like that. We're at like 60.
You're really close.
Yeah, we're close. We're basically like three pitches probably, and like 2 or 3 of them are. We still have to do some traversing, but we, even with like a few traversing pitches, you're like really close. We're like less than 500 feet below the top.
Oh man.
And you can see it right there. And it's like, the day was kind of in and out, but at that time it was like shining in the sun. And, the conditions have been really tricky that day. There was some great climbing, but some really bad climbing. But still, it felt like we're pretty close. Again, like, how is this story ending? Is it ending in, like, Graham's not okay? Okay, no, that's good. Is it ending in, we have to execute a rescue and get him down? No, that's good. Is it ending in we're going down? Like, because he just took this big, scary fall? Like, I don't know. That would suck, but we're done if that's how it ends. And, of course, Mark and I feel kind of guilty for having this conversation on some level of, our friend just took this, what we didn't really know at the time was quite a large fall. Even if you get caught in a little avalanche when you're skiing and there's no consequences to it, when you get knocked off your feet by moving snow, it's pretty scary. And to do it, 5 days up a remote mountain in the middle of nowhere, it's like really scary.
Yeah.
So basically the conclusion we kind of came to was, if it's possible to keep going, it'd be awesome. So to keep going so that the story doesn't end with we got really, really close after years of effort and this happened. But like, that's not for us to decide. And if Graham comes up, basically we decided, like, if Graham comes up here and he wants to go down, like, we're done. And so Steve, kind of off, away from us, has been just having, the conversation within his head. And I think we all are going to remember this a little bit differently, but I kind of remember Graham getting up and us seeing he was actually okay. And, actually okay was like unscathed completely, tore a zipper pull off his jacket, but his chapstick was still inside the pocket.
He tells the story. He does this full self-assessment. The only thing he finds is a broken zipper pull, takes his chapstick out, secures it in another pocket.
Yeah.
Everything's good.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Steve says something, I think, to the effect of like, okay, well, we'll get ready to go down. And Mark and I kind of, I don't think we disagreed, because I in my memory, Graham said something immediately of, well, I'm not leading anymore. Like, I'm kind of shaken up, but I'm okay. I would really like to keep going if one of you guys is psyched to get in front. And the deal kind of was up to that point, like, that Graham and I would do all the leading in the technical terrain because we were just able to do it faster. And Mark and Steve would kind of put in an equal amount of work, or like do more of just the work to help make up for it. And so I took back over once we asked him, like, are you sure? Are you sure you're sure? Are you sure you want to go up? And then it was like, it was really intense, because I kind of like, I had to go out past him, and I got like a few meters past and just like came back, and we just like held each other and cried for a minute, and it was really intense. And then I took off.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
So you're passing where he triggered the slab, where he took the fall.
Yeah.
Had the loose slab, it's gone. As the snow kind of in a better condition for you on your lead?
Yeah. So we were kind of working our way up and left across this kind of face feature below the summit ridge, because it had seemed initially like it was going to make sense to basically go straight up this face and hit the summit ridge, and then you'd walk along the summit ridge. But it turned out that wasn't going to be possible. It was like the summit ridge wasn't walkable. It was like this enormous, completely, unconsolidated, heinous cornice system thing. And so we were kind of working our way across these flutings, and Graham basically went around the corner and tried to go up and triggered the avalanche up closer to the ridge. And so we could look up and see that spot where it had happened. And I wasn't at all worried about that doing it again, but it also seemed like I could take another path to like traverse straight across towards kind of an ice runnely face kind of thing tucked in under a rock band, where it seemed like, it was very much not the same piece of terrain that he had engaged. And, I felt a little bit like a bit of hesitation or trepidation maybe traversing across, but it was the going up that had got us into the unstable snow. So staying below that, it turned out that it was possible to go around it.
Okay. And then you guys get to like the last pitch. You're standing right below the summit of Link Sar, trying to figure out how to get to the top. My understanding is that you take a crack at it. it's just the weirdest snow conditions. You don't know how to climb it. And luckily you've got Mark, who's got what is his background? He's got some like really obscure skill set in snow travel.
Yeah,
and he just comes out of nowhere and is able to hike you guys up to victory. How did that play out?
So I, led a couple more pitches, and the last one was like getting us towards the summit. But, when you're that close, it's like hard to tell where the summit really is in this case. It's like you basically are just going to keep going upwards until there's nothing above you. And so I get us to the summit ridge, and I'm like certain we're on the summit ridge. But again, it's not like a nice ridge. You can't stand on it. And all I can get for an anchor is like hacking a chunk of the cornice out and like burying myself in a hole, get the guys up, and like, I lead out. And so I'm traversing out, and I can tell like, there's this little bit of a fluting, and I think I need to go beyond it and keep traversing towards the summit. But there's no gear. It's like pretty steep. It's very heinous climbing. I kind of do this like overhead tunnel through the fluting and end up on like a probably like 70-degree steep face of double overhead like sugar. And it's like I thought I had to cross it, and I kept thinking, man, if I cross that, I'm going to take out all the support for all the sugar above me. And even if I don't think it's going to avalanche as a slab, but if all that snow falls down on me, then it'll knock me off my feet, and I basically don't have any gear in, and that'll be bad. So I came back and tried to go around the other way and fell into the cornice and like fell head high into like the other unconsolidated sugary stuff, and basically just came back to the belay feeling really dejected. And we kind of had this weird conversation of well, maybe like this is just an unclimbable piece of snow, maybe this is the summit. And it was sensible to have that conversation, but it didn't feel like the summit. Like it's like, I know Graham was saying this in the presentation, like it's like you have this vision of standing on top of something, not what happened there, because it was obvious there was still mountain above us. Even if it's like 20 feet of mountain, it's still 20 feet, and it matters. And so I kind of said, Graham wasn't leading anymore. Steve was busy trying to find us a better anchor than Graham in the snow hole. And, I kind of said like, hey, Mark, would you go up there and take a look? And I honestly wasn't even thinking about Mark's background, but Graham was. And so Mark cut his teeth climbing in Peru, and Peru is famous for fucked up snow climbing. Okay. And it was like Graham and I had been in the front basically the whole trip. And Steve and Mark, lovely humans as they are, like they're amazing climbers, and they're definitely like alpha humans who are not used to being in the back, and neither of them have definitely ever like climbed a big mountain route where they weren't leading an equal share. And so like Mark was not only like the exact right person for the guy, that basically he's the fucked up snow expert and we have fucked up snow, but he's also the guy who like is the coiled spring because he hasn't been out front and hasn't been doing what I'm sure like every fiber in his being wants to do, which is like lead the team up the mountain. And I haven't actually talked to him about it in a while. Like, I don't know that he set out thinking he was going to get to the summit. He just kind of followed my track and then gave us I'm just going to poke a little bit up here. Oh, I'm just going to see. And I know that it was taking a long time, and Steve and Graham and I kind of had moments of not really being sure if this was a good idea. And I remember Graham saying something to me about like, yeah, like I'm not sure, like I'm feeling a little shaken, but I'm going to check myself and just consciously shut up here. And, eventually after lots of wiggling and yelling, like, I think I'm getting somewhere, I think I'm getting closer, it was like, oh shit, I'm on top. And it was this like crazy moment of relief. And, we all Like I was the next to go up there. It was like the clouds had been in and out all day, and then we got up there and they just like cleared.
Oh my gosh.
You couldn't see like all the big mountains were to our north, all the 8,000ers were to our north. And since we were climbing on a southeast face, you couldn't see them from anywhere down in our valley. And all of a sudden you got up on Link Sar and it was like, there's K2, there's K6, there's K7, there's Gasherbrum 4, like all the mountains that you know the name of. And it was like, you know, the hour before sunset. So everything was just like lit up in perfect alpenglow. And like Mark and I had a moment up there and then of course got everybody else up. But that's why I said it's like this amazing symmetry that it's like, it sounds like you're making it up. Like you've got to be making this up for the story or embellishing or whatever, just embracing the cliche, but it's actually true. Like it's the way it panned out is,
I mean, those moments happen. That's why you do it.
Yeah. It was one of those. And then of course, you know, there's other parts that were funny. Like I assumed Mark must have been wearing, I know I told this story at the slideshow, I assume Mark must have taken his puffy jacket because he had an orange jacket and he was wearing an orange jacket when he left, but turns out he didn't, and he was like soaking wet and freezing cold, and I had a puffy and he was really psyched for me to give it to him, and I'm a size small and Mark's a size large, so that makes the summit photos funnier to me at least.
So you guys make it to the summit of this thing. And then it's still, what was it, like 3 days of rappelling to get off the mountain?
Yeah.
And I just have a note here that says anchor building, stuff sacks, peeing on snow.
Yeah.
Tell me about getting off the mountain.
So I think that, you know, we part of that perfect symmetry was like, as we're getting to the top, it's like Graham's belaying in the hole, Mark's getting us up there, like Steve's building an anchor. We all climbed back down to it because there was nothing to rappel off the top with, but had a perfectly safe rappel anchor. And we're able to get down most of the way just on nice ice screw anchors for that first night. But we knew that the anchor that was going to get us back to camp was going to be problematic because it was like, leading that up, you climb this nice ice face, then it rolls back to like a flat snow slope where there's nothing you can get for an anchor except you sitting in the snow, which is fine for belaying people up. Doesn't work so well as a rappel because you don't want to leave a person there. And so it's kind of a technique to, in snow, fill a stuff sack with something, fill a stuff sack with snow, and then, you know, use that as a rappel anchor once you've buried it and stomped on it, etc. Dead man. But it doesn't work if the snow's so dry and crystalline that it doesn't consolidate. So, you know, we're basically like, this isn't hairy. We're like standing there on this flat snow slope, but it's the middle of the night. We've like been out for a long time and we're just kind of collectively very tired and
dehydrated.
Dehydrated and kind of science projecting like, well, we built 2 dead men and equalized them and then they ripped out. So we have pickets. Those aren't going to do us any good in this situation, I don't think. Like, what can we do? And the thing that you can do is sort of work hard in the snow and just stomp on it a bunch and try to consolidate it. And it was still pretty dry. So we realized, like, you know, the stuff sacks weren't, they didn't have that much structure to them either. And I don't even know whose idea it was like, well, maybe we could moisturize them and help them freeze into being something stronger if in addition to stomping on them we melted and froze them a little bit, and we bet we could do that with warm urine. So we just peed on them and stomped on them some more and let it freeze, and it worked. And you know, like, it just took a while and felt kind of ridiculous because you definitely want to test those things to the point where, you know, you really feel like, I know we just buried some stuff stacks filled with snow and peed on them, but like, I really believe this anchor is going to hold. And that kind of thing just kind of kept happening on the way down, where all this heinous snow climbing on the way up just led you into these like protracted science experiments on the way down that none of us, like, nobody objected to it taking forever to get an unassailably good anchor. And to do that, it just was a pain in the ass, took forever, and then, you know, it would get hot and you had to stop rappelling because you were too worried about things falling on you. So the way down just kind of took a while.
Stuffed sacks and warm urine.
Yeah.
Bomber.
Yeah. A couple of them were U.S. Postal Service priority mailing envelopes, those white Tyvek bags. They got like, that sticky tab closure on them and everything. Those are good and free.
Why did you have those in your bag?
For that purpose.
Oh, really?
They also make excellent crampon bags. They're very hard to puncture.
Oh, yeah.
And they're ultralight and, again, free.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I met you through Lizzie Van Patten, who you are dating, who's a longtime friend of mine. And I was talking to her a few weeks back, maybe even a couple months ago, and I was asking her if she was going down to Patagonia this winter. And I was surprised to hear that she was not. I think initially you guys had planned to go, and for whatever reason, it's not going to work out.
Not my fault, for the record.
Okay, not your fault. But she did express that you were like pretty psyched that it fell through and that you're not going to Patagonia, and that you're psyched because you get to go sport climbing.
Yes.
I thought that was really funny. I mean, I don't know you well, but just knowing what you do and knowing about this Link Sar thing, I just assume like the more suffering, the better. So what is it about that? Why is it that you're psyched to go sport climbing this winter instead of going down to Patagonia?
Well, I mean, I started as a climber, as a rock climber, and I love rock climbing. But it turns out once you kind of go down the path of serious, I'm putting quotes on it, serious alpine climbing, you don't get to do that much rock climbing because, the goals of rock climbing training and the goals of alpine climbing are like not that compatible really. And just the time that, you can only really point yourself totally towards one thing. And so my rock climbing, I mean, it's not even like I want to say my rock climbing has suffered. I just haven't gotten to do as much of it in recent years. And, I think the flip side of it is as well that, I work as a mountain guide, which means that my entire like professional life is curating somebody else's experience and keeping somebody else safe in the mountains, keeping myself safe in the mountains. And those things are, I love it. I love the craft of what I do, but it's stressful. Every ski season I finish and think like, oh man, I'm really psyched that we didn't have a bad avalanche incident or anything like that. And every alpine climbing season I finish, I think, I'm really glad nobody got hit in the head with a rock or hurt in some way. And then you take an experience like Link Sar where, again, I don't want it to sound overly dramatic, but it's pretty high risk environment you're functioning in for a long time. And like, I come off all of those experiences and just want to make low consequence decisions. I want to have type 1 fun. I want to, climb for me and just like enjoy life without the, any threat of death, no peeing on stuff sacks, like lots of bolts close together. And I'd like to wake up late and I'd like to go running and I'd like to eat and drink and like enjoy life. And so, I mean, I really do want to go to Patagonia, but I would also love to go on a climbing trip, which actually involves a lot of climbing, not just thinking about climbing or attempting to go climbing. So, yeah.
Awesome. Where are you guys going to go?
We're going to go to Greece. We're going to go to Leonidio because I've heard it's really good. I've never been to Greece. It's really cheap. And the last time we went sport climbing in Europe, we went to Sardinia, which is very cool, and I highly recommend it for anybody looking for kind of limestone adventure climbing, more new routing than you could ever need, and a really cool place, but not my favorite for holiday, like vacation climbing.
Okay.
Because it was bolted mostly, or at least the old crags. I know, sorry, Sardinia, there's lots of new rad stuff, but like a lot of the classic crags were bolted in the 90s. So the roots are polished, the bolts are far apart, and often they're like rusty and bad. So we said for the new place or the next place we go, we want to go somewhere with new bolts that are close together and no polished holds. So
awesome.
Leonidio.
Sounds like it's going to be an amazing trip.
I hope.
So I was poking around on your personal website a little bit, and I was looking at your bio, and one thing that stood out to me, this is speaking about you, it says, easily excited by coffee, beer, and wine, and greasy food of any sort. And then I have a note that says Thai fried chicken.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me about Thai fried chicken.
Thai fried chicken. Well, I really love food, and not in particular, but one of the many foods that I love is Thai food. My neighbor growing up was Thai, and I got a taste for it early. Thailand is also a place that has amazing rock climbing, is dirt cheap, the people are lovely, and the food's amazing.
Have you spent some time there?
Oh, and Thai fried chicken is just a beautiful thing. It's hard to describe. It's like not really battered in the way ours is. It's got like a little bit of like a rice flour on it, but you serve it with this like awesome smoky like chili dipping sauce, and it's like definitely high on the list of perfect foods if you like fried chicken.
Do you have a favorite meal that you can remember after an expedition?
Ooh, that's a good question. I can remember once in India, we came down to the first town and tried to order 2 cold kingfishers, and the guy was like, "We have only one." And my buddy, who is Indian, like really was trying not, in my memory at least, he was trying not to really speak Hindi because his like Hindi was really rusty, but he was like very unafraid of like telling those guys like, "You need to get more beer immediately." And then I remember they came back and like, "Okay, we're sending a guy to town. What should we tell him to get?" And we're like, "Anything as long as it's cold." But I don't know. I mean, on this trip we had fried chicken,
perfect,
and fries, and I don't even remember what else. To be honest, you could basically give me anything that's not like dehydrated food immediately after an expedition, and I will absolutely plow it.
Right. Is there something that you're like daydreaming about when you get back home after a big trip like that?
I mean, I completely hosed myself that I was reading like, you know, the best food writing of 2019 when I was up there. Bad choice. It's like a really bad choice. I read a great book.
That is a bad choice.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, I'll always come down and want a cheeseburger, but that's nothing new. That happens when I'm at Smith. That's like, that's pretty standard. Though I will say, in Pakistan, there's no beer in base camp. And there's no beer in the villages, so you're really excited to get back to Islamabad, where you can kind of have your like slightly illicit beer at the hotel.
Got it. So another thing that I found really, really interesting, I mean, you have a pretty impressive tick list in general. A lot of the stuff I had to Google because I don't even know where these places are. But one really popped out at me. I don't know when this was, but at some point you did a free solo ascent of the Matterhorn North Face in 4 hours and 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
It's not fast by record-setting times.
I think, Uli did it in just over 2, and I think it's been broken since then.
Yeah, I think if my memory's not off, I think Uli did it in like an hour 50, I want to say, and then Danny Arnold, another Swiss climber, broke his record, and I think he knocked 10 minutes off it or something like that. But
that's still really amazing. And seemingly to me, I mean, I remember watching that segment with Uli. It looks really bold. It looks incredibly technical. Is that becoming like a kind of popular standard soloist route up that thing? Or what drove you to want to do that?
I actually have an answer for that, which is, I don't know if it's a popular soloed route. Obviously, you know, there's a long history of bold free soloing on the big faces in the Alps. So, you know, I certainly think it's, you know, been done plenty. But it is still like, I think it's about 3,800 feet long and is, I can't remember. I think it's M5 maybe, which is like 510 mixed climbing and some vertical ice. I'll
have to ask you about that later. I've always wondered about those grades.
Yeah, well, that one, it basically, so the reason I wanted to do it was because when I was kind of a young climber, you know, I was reading a lot of different climbing books, but one that I read was Walter Bonatti's Mountains of My Life. And Walter Bonatti is like, he's any alpine climbing dork's hero. And I mean, Steve House used to have painted on the back of his van that Bonatti is God. And, you know, he's a guy who's been credited with sort of founding the modern school of alpinism that cares more about style than about results, I guess. His story is a really interesting one, but basically he went on the Italian expedition to do the first ascent of K2, and he got embroiled in this whole scandalous story, basically, where the lead climbers accuse him of trying to steal their oxygen to make a summit bid himself, and he ends up spending a night out at, I can't even remember, I think it's like 7,800 meters without any sleeping bags or oxygen or anything, and then basically carrying down the frostbitten Balti porter who he was with the next day, because that guy's like fingers and toes are destroyed. And the expedition does make the first ascent. Bonatti basically gets discredited in the climbing world, and as his sort of last statement on his climbing ethic and like the truthfulness of his account, goes out and basically proves he's the best climber in the world by soloing a new route on the north face of the Matterhorn in winter. And then a woman named Catherine Destavel, who was an amazing alpinist herself, goes back and repeats it solo in winter. I think in the 80s. The route was put up in the 60s. She did it, maybe it was the 90s, I don't know, but I had read her account of it as well, and from those, the two of them, I always just thought, like, man, I would love to climb the north face of the Matterhorn by myself one day. And so I guide the ridge on the Matterhorn pretty frequently, and spend a lot of time around the Matterhorn. And if you've ever been to Zermatt, it's like, it's the most popular, most iconic, like, peak around, and everybody climbs the regular routes on it, but that north face doesn't come in all that often. It's still like, it's very sought after, very climbed route when it's in condition, but it's still got a kind of a reputation. It's one of the 6 big north faces of the Alps, and one year it was in, and I thought it was time to do it, so I took the train over from Chamonix and slept underneath it and took a deep breath, and my goal was to do it in double Uli's time, and then I got up near the top, and it was just a really pretty day, so I blew my time by sitting down and drinking some tea. But
that's a great reason to blow the time.
Yeah, it seemed fine. It was kind of arbitrary anyway.
That's awesome. Very cool. So you actually got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Cinematography from NYU? Mm-hmm. Is that something that you've integrated into this lifestyle at all? Is that something that you've used along with your expedition climbing, or do you have any plans for that?
Not a ton. I've really enjoyed shooting on projects like this Link Sar thing, where we shot a ton in 2017 and a ton in 2019 as well, and hopefully we'll be putting together a movie project out of it.
Oh, cool.
But it's pretty funny to both Graham and I that he has a geology degree and runs a film company, and I have a film degree and don't do anything with it. But I think visual storytelling is still a part of my life. I did a lot of photography and in college, and that's definitely still part of my life. I still love images, and I still love movies, and I still love stories, but I never really wanted to be the guy who made the movie. I was more interested in like the visual side of it and the capturing the images, really. Now when I think about it, I'm just like way out of date. Like I was just recently climbing with someone who works in the film industry now, and we both joke about the stuff that we were learning when we were younger seemed really important, but turns out you don't really need to know how to load a motion picture camera now with like 35 millimeter film, and
right.
I barely know what to do with stuff now. But I also feel like when I stop doing the work that I'm doing now, it'll probably be in favor of something with a little bit more stability and kind of less hustle, and that's definitely not filmmaking, so who knows.
Okay. You seem like a really creative guy. I know that Lizzie's mentioned that you love music, and I've seen that you have a really cool old turntable, DJ turntable at your house. Is there something that you're doing now to kind of fill that creative need, or do you have any creative outlet right now that you're balancing with climbing and all this other stuff? Yeah,
it's interesting. I really do like taking pictures, and I really do like writing, though I can't say I do either of those kind of as a really regular practice. Though I am really excited to work on this Link Sar story, but I think I put a lot of that into cooking. That's like the one sort of
Okay.
thing that I like to do pretty regularly that's creative. But I also see on some level like the new rooting as a creative process.
Sure, yeah.
And so, I spent a lot of time like developing routes at home and bolting things and cleaning things and making that
Out at
kind
Smith?
of stuff. Some at Smith, some
Okay.
on other things around here. Some like
We'll have to talk after this.
yeah,
I want the beta.
But yeah, I mean, I think probably just like consuming a lot of media and then writing and cooking.
Cool.
I don't know.
Do you have any advice for someone who wants to get into expedition climbing? Where does someone start?
Well, I think that the natural progression has got to start with gaining experience and proficiency in technical climbing. And I came from a background that's I think common to a lot of people who grew up on the East Coast, where you start rock climbing and then it becomes winter and you start ice climbing, and once you've ice climbed for a little bit longer, you start mixed climbing and you get pretty decent at those. And then you kind of take that to the mountains. And I think for a lot of people who grew up other places like Oregon, you probably do it a little bit differently in that you've probably been on a glacier maybe before you have climbed ice. But I think that there's no substitute for mileage and experience in that stuff. And I feel really, really lucky that as a mountain guide, I've gotten to just rack up countless hours going out on days when you probably just wouldn't be there if you were just climbing for fun, and gotten to sort of test the limits of what is and isn't a good idea out there, what is and isn't workable weather, and seeing just a lot of days out. And I think that that's a foundation that's really important. But I also think that there's a lot to be said for just going, and it's the same balance that we're all going to have in alpine climbing, that you need to just go and throw yourself out there and live the experience, but you also need to do it in a way that's like conscious of where you're at, and not just going to go out and try to get yourself killed. But I feel like I meet a lot of young climbers who, and I feel like such an old fart saying that because I'm like 36. I'm like not old, but I meet a lot of young climbers who are incredible technical climbers, like way better than I'll ever be, and who have a pretty well-developed sense of judgment, but still like are just sort of like afraid to go out there and afraid to do it and afraid of the process. And you look at someone like Swenson, he went to the Karakoram on his first couple expeditions when he was still in his 20s, trying to do new routes on 8,000 meter peaks, and he didn't do anything, like totally failed, but learned a ton from those experiences. And I think if you can, I guess my advice to young people would be like, get pretty good at the crag, to the point where that's not going to be the crux of it, and then go out there and do it, and hopefully do that with some modeling and mentorship from somebody who can kind of look at your plan and tell you if that's a good idea or not a good idea. And not that you can always do that kind of quarterbacking from home, but yeah, I think just getting out there and gaining that experience is like the way you learn how it goes. It's the way you learn how like you organize an expedition, how your body feels at altitude, how you take care of yourself out there. And that's like part of the process that just has to come from experience. So if you can gain that experience while making sure you're keeping your eye on the long game of like coming home safe, and that's I think that's the way.
Yeah. Just to clarify one thing you said, you said get good at the crag, and is that rock climbing, ice climbing, mixed climbing, any and all those things?
All of it. I think alpinists are on some level the great generalists, and it's like whatever level you're doing it at, mountains are made of rocks, ice, and snow. So it helps to be able to climb all of those mediums, and it helps to be able to climb fluidly between them when they're presented together. And, there's going to be guys like Josh Wharton who can boulder V10, climb M10 and 513 on the same day. And, the rest of us, whatever, we might hope to do one of those, but if you can climb 510, if you can climb WI4, if you can climb M5 and feel like you can, climb those with a pack on and whatever, that's what alpine climbing's about. It's not really about the impossible move. It's doing the easy stuff when it's hard and when it's poorly protected and when it's out there and when you're tired and when, the weather sucks. And I think that's the base of what it's got to come from. Got it.
Do you have any recommendations for someone who is intrigued but isn't sure if they want to commit to a full expedition? Can you think of some objectives maybe in America, in the Western U.S., where you can kind of dip your toe in, try something that's a little more approachable? I'm going to give you a really sideways answer to that, okay. Which is that Perfect. I think that there was this part of climbing culture, which now I'm really going to sound like an old fart, but I think there was always this part of climbing culture which was about adventure and which was about just kind of getting out there. And I think that as climbing has gained in popularity and it's become so much more accessible, sadly, that's one of the things that I see being lost a little bit. And, you see it all over, that there's, folks who climb, like I said, at an insanely high level, and they do that in the mountains too, but they never look beyond the kind of classics, because there are so many guidebook classics to everywhere now. But I think in North America, we still have a million new things to do and a million cool places to go explore. And without, telling anyone to go chase any bad ideas, I feel just chasing something that looks cool. And specifically, it's you should probably go alpine climbing in Alaska or something like that. Go climb some of the classics before you decide to just shoot off the map. And Alaska will teach you a lot about expedition climbing, because the weather can be miserable and there's lots of digging and that sort of stuff and really heavy packs. But, I think that there's a lot of adventures to be had just kind of looking off the beaten path a little bit. And that doesn't necessarily mean new routing. That doesn't necessarily mean, doing anything super hard and scary, but just going someplace where you don't have all the information about it. Yeah.
A good way to learn.
Yeah, cool. So this might totally flop because it's completely, at this point, a tangent, but it's something I skipped over and wanted to come back to. We were talking earlier about Steve Swenson, about him having young partners and kind of what you've learned from him. Do you think there's anything that he's learned from you?
Oh, yeah, that's a funny question. I'm sure if you asked Steve that, he would have I'm sure he'd have a good answer, because I know Steve and Mark are both by no means, guys who believe that they don't have anything to learn from life. But what's really funny is that they've been climbing for a long time, and they've seen a lot of changes in climbing technology and techniques and all of that sort of thing. And teaching people the most current techniques is what I do and what I kind of have a hard time not doing sometimes. But with those two, I definitely made a point of kind of saying to myself, listen, what they've been doing for the last 30 years seems to be working just fine. Maybe don't give them shit about the way they do this, or don't offer unsolicited advice about their rappel technique. But one of the coolest things for me has been them seeing what I'm doing and then noticing maybe that Graham's doing it too, and then saying, hey, what is that you guys are doing over there? That looks like that works better than what we're doing. Can you show me how to do that?
Oh, cool.
And that was, I have to say, a very minor thing, but kind of a trip of feeling flattered that, halfway up this mountain, being asked by these two guys who have been veterans of the game and my personal idols, hey, show me how to do that thing. That was pretty cool.
Awesome. I'd love to ask you about what's going on right now. Is there anything that you've got going on that you're especially excited about? right now?
Yes, give me 1 second. Can I go put some more quarters in?
Yeah, we're gonna pause.
So actually, my answer to that is I'm washing a sleeping bag that came home from Link Sar, and it's really, really gross. I'm gonna go put some more quarters in the dryer.
He's excited to have a clean and dry sleeping bag.
Okay, I'll be back in 2 minutes.
All right, so we're back. So I was just asking you, what is something that you are excited about right now? And it could be upcoming trip. It could be some new idea you've got kicking around, new possibilities for the future. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I am really excited to just kind of be off-leash, I guess, for the next maybe 6 months, because, you know, one of the things that I think Graham and I have taken from Steve and have kind of agreed on is that we're kind of past the part of our lives where we just want to be on endless expeditions. And we both, I think, you know, had a period where it was like, oh, you go to Alaska in the spring, you go to the Himalaya in the fall, and then you do it again. And, you know, you kind of I can't do that without getting burnt out. And, you know, I think that the best way for me to stay checked in to, you know, training and sort of focusing on an objective is to give myself times when I'm not. And so that's where I'm at right now, that it's, you know, really brings into focus how much you do have to sacrifice when you're in that mode, and how, you know, many whatever, like dinners with friends you don't get to have, or how many, you know, runs just because it's nice out you don't get to go on, and, you know, going to spend time with my family, and going on vacation with my girlfriend, and that's the stuff I want to do right now.
Sport climbing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny because she and I did a route recently, or most of it, where I realized I was done coasting in terms of performance. I was like, okay, it took exactly 3 months for me to be pissed off that I can't climb a hard thing. So I do I will be trying to get strong again for rock climbing, but I just want to go climbing because it's fun at this point, and go skiing because it's fun, and hang out with people because I can. So
cool.
Yeah.
Do you have the next expedition in mind?
Yeah, Graham and I have some ideas. You know, we'll see how it all pans out, but we'd like to go back to Pakistan. We've got, you know, kind of a couple things floating around at any given time. I think I know where we're going to end up, but probably back in Pakistan in 2020.
I like it.
2021.
So much mystery.
Yeah, you know, it's like
don't want anyone to snake the FA from you.
No, well, and it's also referred to in the game as tasty talking. You know, you might as well just wait until you've done it before you start talking about it.
I like that. Yeah, I know. It's the pre-spray.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what I've been calling it with sport. I can't claim that, but that's what we've been calling it in sport climbing, and it's getting so much more common now with social media and all this stuff. And it's fun sometimes to see what people are getting excited about. But yeah, so at some level, it's just like, yeah, maybe just shut up until you do the thing.
yeah. Especially, I mean, I don't really believe that anybody's going to try to like snake us on the projects that I'm thinking about. But, you know, I would feel very self-conscious about talking about them at this point.
Fair enough. What is something that you have been especially grateful for lately?
You know, I think on some level it's just that time to kind of breathe and feel like both obviously, you know, like a deep sense of satisfaction with having done this thing, but mostly I think with just kind of coming back with the contrast that you have, having, you know, been in that environment and in that kind of goal focused mode for a while, and then coming back to Bend, and, you know, just getting to plug back into this like incredibly welcoming community of friends that I have here, and feeling like, you know, when you're out in the mountains, obviously you feel really far away from the rest of your world and really grateful for the people that you're there with. But then when you get to kind of come back in, it feels really, really good, and like reminds me why this has been home for the last like 15 years or so. So yeah,
awesome.
It's good to be home.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. That was
let
fun.
people know where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me at www.nowclimbing.com, and on Instagram is now_climbing, and I spend my time either climbing for myself or climbing for work all over the world. So if you want to go climbing, let me know.
Yeah, what about guiding? You got any plugs for that?
Yeah, it's all at nowclimbing.com. But
Okay.
Let's see. I mean, Bend, Oregon is amazing. I was guiding at Smith Rock this week, and even in the middle of December, it's like the best. So you should come to Smith, and you should come to the Alps. And if you have any other good ideas, I'd love to hear that too. So let me know.
Awesome. Well, Chris, I really enjoyed the presentation. It's all stuff that's totally outside of my paradigm, and it's really fun to see kind of a taste, or see rather a window into your world, and I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been tons of fun.
Cool. Well, maybe you can explain to me how to boulder V10 sometime.
All right, we'll break open the whiskey and we'll get to it.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
Move with the rhythm. Shake it up, stop when the clock hits 13. Sing 1, 2, 3, 4. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.